It started on a foggy morning, the kind where the mist clung to the windows like a veil, and the air outside was so still it felt like the world was holding its breath. Emily Carter, a retired wildlife illustrator in her early 50s, was sipping her coffee while gazing out over the rolling hills that cradled her cottage. Her home sat on the edge of the Appalachian woods, secluded and serene, just the way she liked it. After decades of hustle and deadlines in the city, Emily had chosen peace over chaos, trading skyscrapers for squirrels and deadlines for silence. Her days were filled with watercolor paintings, tending to her flower garden, and long walks through the forest trails she had come to know like the lines on her palm. Life was simple, predictable, and safe. That morning, though, something felt different. As she stepped outside to refill the bird feeders hanging from the porch rafters, she noticed paw prints in the damp earth, small, feline, but not those of a domestic cat. They were wider, more defined. She paused, bent down, and touched the tracks. Still fresh. Emily knew animals, she had spent years drawing them, researching their behaviors and forms, but these prints stirred something deeper than curiosity. They sparked a flutter of concern. Raccoon, maybe? No. Too cat-like. She looked out into the trees, scanning the edge of her yard, but saw nothing unusual. The forest remained silent, holding its secrets close. Later that evening, as Emily read in her armchair beside the fireplace, she heard a faint sound, like a shuffle or a soft thump. She turned down the volume on the record player, paused, and listened. Nothing. Shrugging it off as an old house creak or perhaps a branch falling, she returned to her book. But the sound came again, closer, more distinct. A scratch. Then a low thump. Then silence. She rose slowly, her heart quickening just a little, and walked cautiously toward the kitchen where the sound had seemed to come from. Everything looked undisturbed, except the window above the sink was slightly open. She was certain she had locked it. A chill crept up her spine. Emily reached for the flashlight under the sink and beamed it outside. Still, nothing. Just darkness. Sighing, she locked the window, drew the curtains, and returned to the warmth of the fire, telling herself it was probably a squirrel or bird testing the frame. The next morning brought a fresh surprise. On the wooden floor near the back door was a smear of mud, tiny prints leading across the kitchen and disappearing under the hallway table. Emily froze, her eyes tracing the trail. She bent down and touched the floor. Damp. Not old. Something had been inside. She slowly opened the hallway closet, unsure of what she'd find, nothing but coats and boots. The trail stopped there. Perplexed, she cleaned the floor and checked every window and door. All were closed. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Days passed, and the signs multiplied. Her favorite wool blanket on the couch was found with small claw marks. Food she had left out for cooling mysteriously vanished, twice. And once, she heard a strange, almost purring sound from the guest bedroom late at night. Yet she never saw anything. It was as though her visitor was a ghost, careful and silent, always one step ahead. Then, one rainy evening, it happened. Emily had just returned from the woods, drenched from a sudden downpour. She was toweling off when she heard a soft, guttural chirp, an unmistakable feline sound, but deeper, wilder. She spun around, and there he was. Sitting at the far end of the living room, near the fireplace, eyes gleaming in the dim light, was a young bobcat. Not a house cat. Not even close. His ears were tufted with black tips, his coat a rich blend of tawny gold and dusky grey, spotted faintly across his sides. His tail was short, his muscles taut, his stance alert but not aggressive. He stared at her with fierce, intelligent eyes, but not threatening ones. Emily didn't move. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew this could be dangerous. A wild animal inside her home? But something in his gaze stopped her from panicking. The bobcat didn't snarl. He didn't hiss. He just watched. And then, as calmly as if he belonged there, he padded across the room, curled up beside the fireplace, and rested his head on his paws. Emily stood frozen for what felt like forever. She should have shooed him out. Called animal control. But she did none of those things. Instead, she slowly backed into the kitchen, retrieved a bowl, and poured out some leftover roasted chicken she'd planned to eat herself. She placed it on the floor near him and stepped back. He lifted his head, sniffed the air, walked over, and ate, carefully, politely, like a guest with manners. That night, Emily slept with one eye open, keeping the bedroom door cracked just enough to hear any movement. But there was none. The bobcat remained by the fire all night, quiet and still. The next morning, he was gone. The front door was still locked, the windows shut. Yet somehow, he had slipped out as quietly as he had arrived. Emily didn't tell anyone. Who would believe her? A bobcat just waltzing into her home, helping himself to dinner and warmth without so much as a growl? She was torn between awe and disbelief. But that was just the beginning. Over the next week, he returned. Not every day, but enough that she began to expect him. Sometimes he appeared at night, sometimes early in the morning. Once, she found him asleep in her laundry basket. Another time, she caught him on the back porch, licking raindrops off her garden chair. Slowly, an unspoken routine formed between them. Emily never tried to cage him, never reached out to pet him. She simply let him be. And he, in turn, respected her space. But it wasn't just his presence that unnerved and fascinated her. It was the feeling she got when he was near. She began to notice things. The way birds stopped chirping the moment he arrived. The way the house felt different, more alive, when he was there. And the way her old aches and loneliness seemed to fade, even if just for a little while, when he lay near her chair while she painted. One evening, during a particularly violent thunderstorm, the bobcat didn't leave. As the sky cracked open and the wind howled through the trees, he paced near the windows, visibly anxious. Emily, against all common sense, knelt down and spoke to him softly, like one might to a frightened child. And in a moment that would forever burn itself into her memory, he walked over, pressed his head lightly against her hand, and closed his eyes. Emily didn't sleep that night, not because she was afraid, but because she couldn't stop staring at the sleeping creature beside her fireplace. Wild. Beautiful. And somehow, already part of her world. By the end of that week, she no longer thought of him as a visitor. She had started calling him Ash, after the streak of grey that ran down his spine like a trail of embers. She left out food for him, made a space by the fireplace just for him, and began reading aloud in the evenings, secretly believing he listened. And in return, Ash stayed longer, ventured closer, and began to trust her in a way no wild animal ever had before. But Emily had no idea what had brought him to her. What had pushed this young bobcat to cross the invisible line between wild and tame, fear and trust, stranger and companion? She didn't yet know that Ash's story was far deeper, darker, and more remarkable than she could imagine. That his arrival was not just coincidence, but fate, driven by loss, survival, and something neither of them understood yet. What she did know was that, for the first time in years, her house no longer felt too quiet. Her days no longer felt too long. And her heart, so used to solitude, was learning, beat by careful beat, to open again. The morning after the storm, Emily awoke to find Ash still curled up by the fireplace, fast asleep. A beam of golden sunlight pierced through the kitchen window, highlighting the soft rise and fall of his sides as he breathed. It was hard to believe this wild animal had once been a stranger. He looked peaceful, almost like a house cat, except for the strength woven into every sinewy muscle and the quiet wildness that never truly left his golden eyes. Emily crouched beside him, studying the faint scars that marked his side, some healed, others newer. She wondered how he had survived out there, alone, long enough to find her cottage. She whispered softly, "Where did you come from, Ash?" But of course, he offered no answer, only a twitch of the ear and the subtle flick of his short tail. Days turned into a quiet rhythm. Emily no longer questioned his presence. Ash was simply there. Like the old oak tree by her porch or the worn path to the woods. He never meowed or yowled, only communicated through posture, eyes, and the occasional low rumble in his chest when she sat too close or moved too fast. He was cautious but not cold, guarded but not unreachable. Emily found herself watching him more closely than she had ever studied her sketch subjects. He had patterns, preferences. He liked roasted turkey better than fish. He refused to walk across tile floors. He never touched the upstairs, as if respecting it was her domain. And every morning, before the sun crested the trees, he disappeared into the woods, only to return again by dusk, like clockwork. One day, curiosity got the better of her. After Ash left, she slipped on her hiking boots, grabbed her binoculars, and followed his tracks into the forest. The path he took was winding and indirect, meandering through thickets and underbrush she rarely explored. Several times she lost the trail completely, only to find it again near a muddy stream or against a moss-covered log. It was almost as if Ash wanted to be difficult to follow. Emily pressed on, brushing branches aside, ignoring the growing ache in her knees. Then, just as she reached a clearing, she froze. Nestled beneath a fallen tree was a small den, just barely large enough for an animal his size. Inside were bones, feathers, scraps of fur. But it was what lay near the center that made her breath hitch, a torn collar. She knelt slowly and picked it up. The faded nylon strap had once been red, now stained brown with dirt and time. There was no tag, just a rusted metal buckle. A bobcat with a collar? The implications rushed at her all at once. Ash wasn't born in the wild. He had once belonged to someone. Raised, likely in captivity, perhaps illegally. Her heart sank. No wonder he had such unusual behavior, trusting, almost domestic at times, yet filled with skittish instincts. He was caught between two worlds, never fully belonging to either. That might explain the wounds too. Had he escaped? Been abandoned? She backed away from the den carefully, not wanting to disturb it further. When Ash returned that evening, she didn't mention what she found. But she noticed something different in his eyes that night, tiredness, maybe, or a distant sadness that hadn't been there before. Emily sat across the room from him, painting in silence. Her canvas that night was not of birds or landscapes, but of Ash, head raised, ears alert, eyes full of something ancient and aching. When she finished, she left it on the easel, and for a moment, Ash approached it, stared at his own likeness, then walked quietly to the window and stared out. Over the next few days, strange things began happening. The first was a knock at the door. Emily rarely got visitors. Her nearest neighbor lived nearly a mile away, and she hadn't had a delivery in weeks. But when she opened the door, there was no one there, only tire tracks in the gravel and the faint scent of cigarette smoke lingering in the air. The second was the sound of voices in the woods late at night, too distant to make out clearly, but unmistakably human. And then, the third came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when Ash didn't return by dusk. The sun slipped behind the hills. The house grew cold. Still no sign of him. Emily paced, her mind racing with possibilities. Had he been injured? Attacked? Trapped? Her heart ached at the thought of never seeing him again. She sat by the fireplace long into the night, the flames burning low, staring at the door as if sheer willpower would bring him back. But it wasn't until nearly dawn that she heard the soft thud against the back porch. She rushed outside, barefoot and frantic, and there he was. Ash, limping, his left shoulder caked in blood and dirt. His eyes were glazed, and he collapsed the moment she reached him. Emily's instincts kicked in. She gathered him in her arms, heavier than she expected, but she didn't care, and brought him inside. She cleaned the wound as best she could, using warm water, hydrogen peroxide, and her old veterinary kit from her days illustrating animal anatomy. The cut was deep, likely from a trap or wire. He winced but didn't lash out. When she wrapped the wound with gauze, he rested his head against her knee, trusting her completely. Tears welled in her eyes. Over the next few days, she nursed him back to health. He barely moved, only shifting slightly to drink or eat the broth she placed near him. Emily stayed beside him day and night, reading aloud, humming quietly, her hand resting near his paw, but never touching unless he allowed it. She spoke gently, telling him stories from her childhood, her art career, even the heartbreak that had driven her into solitude. "You're the first soul I've let into this house in years," she whispered once. "You don't know how much you've given me just by being here." By the fourth day, Ash began to stir more. The swelling reduced, and he limped to his usual spot by the window. But he was changed, edgier, more alert. His ears twitched at every sound, his eyes scanned the tree line constantly. Emily noticed, too. The birds had stopped coming to the feeders. The usual rustle of squirrels in the trees had gone silent. And worst of all, she began seeing strange shapes in the woods, figures in camouflage, standing too still, watching. Her instinct screamed that something was wrong. Then one night, her suspicions were confirmed. A loud bang woke her at midnight, a rifle shot in the distance, then the unmistakable crackle of leaves being trampled. Ash bolted upright, his fur bristling. Emily rushed to the window and saw flashlights in the woods. Her heart pounded. Someone was hunting. But not deer or wild boar, they were looking for Ash. She had to act. Emily pulled on her boots, grabbed her flashlight, and, against all reason, headed outside. Ash tried to follow, but she turned to him sharply. "No. Stay here. Please." For the first time, he obeyed without protest. She followed the sounds through the dark trees until she found them, two men with rifles and headlamps, talking in low tones. One of them held something in his hand. Emily stepped closer, staying hidden behind a tree. When the man raised the object to the light, her blood ran cold. It was the same red collar she had found in the den. "We should have never let that freak get away," one of the men muttered. "You know what he's worth? Exotic breed, raised to hunt, trained to kill. He's not some stray. That woman's probably harboring him." The other man nodded. "If we can't trap him, we'll shoot him. Clean. Quiet. No questions asked." Emily's stomach turned. They weren't just random hunters. They were the ones who had owned him. Used him. Hurt him. And now they wanted him back, or dead. She crept away, heart hammering, and didn't stop running until she was back home. Ash was waiting, his ears perked. She locked the doors, drew every curtain, and knelt in front of him. "You were never just a wild animal," she whispered. "You were running from something. And now they've found you." Ash stared at her, unblinking. Then, slowly, deliberately, he nudged her hand with his head and pressed his body against her legs. For the first time, Emily wrapped her arms around him, fully embracing him, no longer seeing him as just a guest, but as family. The threat was real now. She would have to make a choice. Run. Hide. Or fight for him. The silence the next morning was almost unbearable. Emily lay in bed, wide awake, listening for every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves outside. Ash was curled at the foot of her bed, his wound healing but his nerves raw. The night before had changed everything. The truth was out. Those men weren't strangers, they were Ash's past. And now they were close. Closer than she'd ever dared to imagine. Emily had seen the cold intent in their eyes, the way they spoke of Ash like a possession, like a thing. There was no doubt anymore, if they found him, they'd either take him or kill him. She knew she couldn't wait for them to make the next move. By mid-morning, Emily had packed a bag with food, water, a small first aid kit, and the most valuable item she owned, her sketchbook. It was filled with years of her life in drawings, but lately, Ash's image dominated every page, Ash watching the snow fall, Ash curled by the fireplace, Ash walking silently through the woods. He had become the story she'd never meant to write, but now couldn't imagine letting go of. She looked down at him. "We're leaving," she said softly. "We're going to find somewhere safe. Somewhere they'll never find you." Ash seemed to understand. He rose slowly and followed her to the door, limping only slightly now. but just as she reached for the knob, she heard it, the sound of tires on gravel. Not one car, but two. Her heart jumped. She peeked through the curtain. A dark SUV and a battered pickup had pulled up just beyond the gate. Two men stepped out. It was them. They had come for him. "Back door," she whispered. Ash followed without hesitation. They slipped through the kitchen exit and into the forest, moving quickly despite the tension in the air. Emily had memorized every path behind her cottage. There was a trail that led to an old ranger's station, long abandoned. It wasn't far, maybe 2 miles, but every step felt like a marathon with danger so close behind. Halfway through the trail, Ash stopped. His ears twitched. Emily turned and saw them. The men had followed. They were further back, moving slowly, methodically, calling out in mocking tones. "Here, kitty kitty. Come on out, we know you're close." One of them had a rifle slung over his shoulder. The other carried a tranquilizer gun. They weren't going to ask questions. Emily looked at Ash, who was now crouched low, every muscle tight. She had to make a choice, keep running or stand and fight. And then, in a moment that felt like pure instinct, she turned and shouted, "Hey! Leave him alone!" The men froze. "You're trespassing," she yelled, her voice firm but shaking. "And I know who you are. If you take one more step, I'll call the rangers. I'll call the press. I'll tell everyone what you've done to this animal." The man with the rifle took a step forward. "Lady, you have no idea what you're getting into. That bobcat was bred illegally. He was trained to attack. He's dangerous. You're harboring a weapon, not a pet." "He's not a weapon," she snapped. "He's a survivor? Of you. And I'm not letting you take him back." Ash stepped in front of her, his body lowered protectively, teeth bared in a silent growl. The tension snapped like a bowstring. The man raised the rifle. And then, everything happened at once. Ash lunged, not at the man, but at the gun. In a flash of fur and claws, he knocked it aside, sending the rifle flying into the underbrush. The man fell backward, cursing, clutching his arm. The second man tried to aim the tranquilizer gun, but Emily, fueled by adrenaline and fury, grabbed a fallen branch and struck him hard across the side. He collapsed with a groan. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of heavy breathing and the wind through the trees. Emily turned to Ash, who was bleeding again from his reopened wound but standing tall. She dropped to her knees beside him, tears mixing with dirt on her face. "You protected me," she whispered. "Even now, after everything." She called the ranger station from her emergency phone. They arrived an hour later, uniformed officers who listened closely as Emily explained everything, from Ash's sudden arrival to the men's illegal pursuit. She showed them the torn collar, the injuries, the way he had been hunted like property. To her relief, the rangers didn't treat her like a criminal. One of them, a quiet older woman named Dana, knelt beside Ash and examined his wound. "He's not aggressive," Dana said. "He's alert. Intelligent. This one's different." The two men were taken into custody. It turned out they had a long list of violations, illegal breeding, unlicensed wildlife possession, and multiple complaints in other counties. Emily watched them be driven away, but her relief was tempered by a new fear. What would happen to Ash now? Dana sat beside her on a fallen log. "You know this animal can't go to just anyone," she said gently. "He's wild. Technically. But he's also bonded to you. That makes things complicated." Emily looked at Ash, who was resting quietly, his head in her lap. "I don't care about complicated," she said. "He came here for a reason. He chose this place. He chose me. And I'm not letting him go." Dana smiled. "There might be a way. There's a wildlife sanctuary about 4 hours north. They specialize in animals like him, rescued exotics, hybrids, animals that don't fit the mold. They have the space, the resources, and the staff to care for him. but they don't separate bonded pairs. Emily blinked. Pairs? Dana nodded. That's what this is. You too. You're a bonded pair. It doesn't happen often. But when it does, we don't break it. If you're willing to relocate, there's a cabin on the property. Artists sometimes stay there to document the animals. You'd be part of the team. Part of his team. Emily didn't even hesitate. Yes. Whatever it takes. Yes. 2 weeks later, the forest behind her old cottage faded into the distance as Emily drove north, Ash sitting beside her in a specially secured enclosure, his eyes calm and steady. The sanctuary was even more beautiful than she had imagined. Rolling fields, thick forests, quiet streams. And peace. Real peace. A place where Ash could roam safely, where he didn't have to run anymore. The cabin was simple, cozy, and filled with light. Emily set up her art supplies near the window. Ash explored the space carefully, then returned to her side and curled up like he always had. The transition was seamless, as if they had always been meant to come here. Months passed. Seasons changed. Ash regained his strength fully. His coat grew thick and glossy, his eyes brighter than ever. Emily's artwork flourished. Her drawings of Ash began to gain recognition, first online, then in wildlife exhibitions. She started giving talks about animal-human bonds, about rescue, about trust. But she never spoke of Ash like he was a pet. He was her partner. Her family. Her miracle. Visitors to the sanctuary often asked about the bobcat who followed her everywhere like a shadow. She'd smile and say, "He snuck into my house one night during a storm and never left." Ash remained a wild soul, but one who had found something even rarer than safety. He had found someone who saw him not as an animal to tame, but as a being to respect. He had found home. And Emily? She had opened her heart to the unexpected and discovered a kind of love that didn't need words, only trust. Only presence. Together, in a quiet forest far from fear, they lived not as owner and pet, not even as rescuer and rescued, but as something deeper. As a forever kind of wild.